welcome everyone. I mean, it's been really, really interesting. I'm just being with you guys over the last 2 weeks and going through the process. I think today's session is really going to take us a lot further in terms of embedding our knowledge around change. And I'm not talking about my session, which is looking at change, but Corinne's session, which really is an extension of the session in the sense that a lot of the power has moved to the audience. The audience is driving quite a bit of change, and I remember in that very very first session, I think somebody had a query, and Corinne said, had a query about what they needed to do, and Corinne said, can you look at that question from the perspective of the audience? And so these are not two separate sessions. These are two sessions actually that are quite integrated and work together. But I wanted to talk about change because I think the issue with change is that to be an effective future leader, we really need to be comfortable with change. Um, and that comfort with change really comes from understanding the change process, the role you can play in it, but also the role that the environment plays in change. I think that's really what I think the leader of the future is someone who is comfortable with change, who is not resistant to change, but also knows how to use change to their advantage. And so I'm really hoping that today's session will be about the process of having you comfortable with change, and also to recognize that you don't have to be the manager running the program in order to be a change manager. You don't need to be the person in leadership in order to be a change manager. That in fact, everyone in the system actually plays a role in change, and that you can lead from the bottom up. So next week, when we talk about managing your manager, we're going to the next program that we do when we talk about managing your manager, we're really going to talk about a lot of these things. So I want to go back to the very first session that we had when we reminded ourselves of how COVID has really just changed the way we work. I mean, I find it so interesting that Vietnam is back in a lockdown. Corrine and I were talking before everyone came on about how India has really been a helpful lesson for us to not to constantly be on our guard. And even in South Africa, in the area that I live in here in Gauteng, we got a message from the local government to say that there had been a worrying increase in the number of COVID infections in a particular area, and it looks like we have a variant in South Africa that is quite fatal. It spreads very fast, and the number and so the percentage of people who actually die, although it's low, the actual numbers is quite high. So we know already that COVID has led to a shift online, and that we're looking at a future where there's going to be some kind of hybrid model of working from home, working in the office, etc. We also know that COVID has accelerated technological disruption. A lot of people are trying new models, new business models. We know that we've found new ways of telling stories. I'm just listening to Lainey talk about how TikTok has actually influenced storytelling. You know, those TikTok templates, the way TikTok engages people. You're beginning to see more TikTok videos making it onto other platforms, but you're also using the TikTok style of storytelling, making it onto other platforms. So there's this constant change in the terms of the way we tell our stories. We're absolutely mobile first, and we can see that there's an increase in consumption. The Reuters research backs that up, but even really good for us is that Reuters research last year that found that without a doubt, COVID had reinforced the value of credible, verified information, and so journalism matters. We're doing this workshop on just after World Press Freedom Day, and it's been really, really interesting about the large numbers of debates that are being held about the value of supporting something that is a public good. That journalism is not merely a product, it is more than a product, is something that actually plays a critical role in democracies. We've seen continued shift to more visual news. Television news and online sources have seen a real surge in demand. A lot of people are beginning to identify TV, or at the very least, news that comes from streaming, that is visual. We're still fighting and trying to find business models, revenues. There's been a bit of a surge in recent months, and I think that year on year we're going to find that we're kind of slowly clawing back when it comes to revenues. Um, but we really do know that our long-term survival will need a deeper connection with our audience online, and that there are some formats that are really good for reader engagement, and certainly that's what we're going to be looking at today. But I want to kind of start off with saying, why do we even put change in an online digital change management in an online digital program? And the reason is because change is the only constant. If you can, we don't know what platforms we're going to be using next year. We don't know how we're going to be telling our stories next year, but we do know that things will change. And we've already seen it, right? I mean, the rise of Signal, the rise of TikTok, different formats. Even this format of doing a workshop on Zoom is a change that we've seen really accelerate over in what, a year and a half since last year. So change is the only constant, and for media leaders, and when I say leaders, I want to be absolutely clear. I don't mean people who have the title of editor or managing editor or have a position, right? There certainly is leadership in the hierarchy. But for many of us, the leadership role we play comes without a title. We play a leadership role in the sense that we lead from where we are. Um, and so for leaders, this comfort with change is really essential. Not only a comfort for change, but a hunger for doing things better, for improving, for not kind of, particularly in media, which is such a dynamic sector, we really need to be in a situation where we're constantly looking at how do we tell the story better? How do we engage our audience better? We are future fit leaders because we're comfortable with change. Um, and so I'm going to kind of go through some of the processes. I'm not going to go in great detail. I have put a lot of detail in the presentation because we're going to send you a PDF of the presentation afterwards. But what I want you to do is to get the overarching idea of the change process and how you can identify your own behavior and your own resistance to change, but also the resistance to change of the people around you so that you can deal with it. So essentially what we do know, without a doubt, is that change is the only constant in media. I mean, it's the only constant in the world, but in media, we know that leaders need to be comfortable with change and that they need to have diverse responsibilities. I love this program. I love this program because we're not saying you need to know how to write a story, you need to know how to do this, you need to know how to do that. It really is giving you a smorgasbord. I love that word. A variety of different skills and things that you can take on board, and maybe even find a new space for yourself, a new passion for yourself, a new interest for yourself as you're going forward. But it's kind of giving you a little bit of a lot of different things so you can have conversations with your managers, with your leaders, so that you can actually play a more proactive role in your organization. So there have been a lot of power shifts, and sometimes in your own organization, it's really a good idea just to be still and listen. And by that I mean, not to be, but just to observe what's happening in your organizations. What are the power dynamics? I will tell you that one of the big things that I have underestimated is the value of in-person work, and for you to be able to assess people, how they're managing, how they're coping, how they understand the value of in-person work for training people, right? I mean, and even though we've done an incredible job about managing online, there are still little things that we need to be able to find. And so for me, it was just, this week has been really interesting for me just to suddenly got it in my head to have individual meetings with everyone and just to really get a sense from them. How are they doing? How are they coping? And so I would say that even as I'm giving you some ideas of what's happening globally in other organizations, I really want you to kind of just think about um, what do you know about the sector? If you're looking to get back into work, can you talk to people who are out there and get a sense from them? What are the changing dynamics, right? Um, just like we need to update our CV, we also need to update our understanding of what's happening on the ground. Um, where we can add value, where the gaps are, where people are moving, what direction people are moving in. But I mean, one of the big things that we've seen, and we've seen it not only in media, but you know, in online consumption, in retail, that the power has shifted from the producer to the user. The user has got so many different choices, and that shift really kind of introduces new ways of thinking. Clearly, we can become it's a no-brainer that in media sector, technological change is going to be constant. We're constantly kind of looking at new ways that technology can take over, whether it is automated reporting, whether it is automated speech to text or text to speech, news consumption. All of that's going to accelerate in the coming years. But also, right, there are huge shifts in organizational cultures. There are huge shifts of operations within organizations that impact on culture. And then we also know that in the media sector, the agility of startups has really given them the edge. When you're looking at change management, it's really, really difficult to try and impose change on an organization that is quite entrenched, on a culture that is quite staid and stuck. And so what we're really finding is that there's been a power shift towards almost towards um, to startups. I mean, if you look at, and this is an aside, if you look at the real barriers to kind of, if you look at the marketing kind of barriers to entry, barriers, the product, etc., you can already begin to see how media um, is changing dramatically so that the barriers to entry have dropped considerably, but also, right, I mean, the product, the demand from the consumer, and the ability of the consumer to get information from a whole host of different sources, not only in Singapore and Vietnam, or Malaysia, or Philippines, where you are, they can get news about your country from external providers. So I'm not going to really spend a lot of time on this slide, except to say to you, I want you to think about. So when COVID happened, the incredible thing about COVID was because the crisis was so big, and because it was almost in many cases legislated that you needed to work from home, that the change could not be resisted, and the change was immediate. I know from my organization, you know, one week we were all in the office, and the next week all our equipment was in someone's home. We had changed our insurance. We had moved people. We had moved, it was an immediate, and there was no resistance to it. The issue was there. We made a plan. We implemented the plan. Um, and people moved with the plan. The question that we now have to ask ourselves is, how can we do this better? And improving the way that we are working, we might now get resistance because there is no big crisis for people to actually be looking at. So what I do want to say though, that really there are kind of three major reasons why people resist change. Um, and part of that process for you is to understand what your default position is when somebody suggests doing something differently. Do you get excited? I have a sense that Lainey would get excited. Lainey would want to do something differently. I think Lainey would be one of those kind of ambassadors for change within an organization. She'd be like really keen to start it. Um, you know, but when the change is too much, right? I mean, the reality is that if there's too much change, we changed last week, we changed last month, we introduced a change plan, and in fact, you didn't follow it through. That what we really do is we build up skepticism around change, where people begin to think, Why must we do it? It's bad enough we're doing this already. We keep on doing change. You keep on doing a better way of audience engagement. You keep on doing a better way of social media. Um, and, and we never ever get to the point where we feel like we're in control. And you can see why that process of skepticism, why should we, um, um, would be very high in media, for the simple reason that that we're always trying something new, right? The question is how we end that process of something new. Whether we have a close out period that says we tried something new, it didn't work, but this is what we learned from it, or if we try something new, it doesn't work, and we just kind of kick it under the table and hope that no one notices that we did that. The research shows that 7 out of 10 change management initiative fails. I mean, I think it's actually sometimes higher than that, particularly because real change comes because of iterative changes. You change something, it doesn't work, you learn a lesson from it, you change something else, it doesn't work, but you keep on moving towards the end goal. And a good change manager recognizes how to actually celebrate those particular changes. Even though they're small and they don't feel like they were the actual thing that we were trying to achieve, a good change manager will actually help that. Digital change fatigue because of too much digital change, right? It links to the skepticism. We're going to fail. We keep on changing. Nothing happens. Um, um, that's a real kind of issue. And passive resistance is not so much a reason why we resist change, but and I think a better way to describe it is organizational culture. So, and newsrooms that people will kind of watch to see what everyone else is doing, and if everyone else looks like they're quite excited, that they might actually then follow suit. But generally, people don't say no, but they don't say yes either. They go along with the process. They go along with the process until eventually you have a sense where when it begins to look like it's falling apart, then all of these skeptics and the passive resistors come out, and they and then they speak out against it. So I have put into the slides two of my favorite change managing gurus. The one is Rosabeth Moskanta. I am an absolute fangirl for her. She's really brilliant. She does a lot of work in Silicon Valley, and really what she talks about makes real sense for me in media, even though I think right at the beginning she helped Reuters really kind of with their digital strategy, but most of her stuff is with online then. You notice that I'm not actually going to go through her processes, and I'm not going to go through Kotter's processes either. I've simply put them in here so that when you're going through the presentation, you can actually look at the steps. What I do want to do, though, is to talk to you about my own experiences. In the last 6 minutes that we've got left, I want to talk to you about my own experiences of when people are putting in place a change process. What are the most common things that help them succeed so that you can build those characteristics in your own work life? But also, what are the most common things that are likely to make us fail? So, um, um, it's the way we perceive change that very often is the starting point. It's the way we present change to ourselves and to our colleagues that very often is the starting point. Is it a threat, right, or is it an opportunity? Are we dealing with change in a particular way because we have no choices? Or is it an opportunity to be able to do things differently, to do things in a new way? Cantor says that change is a threat when it's done to us, but it's an opportunity when it's done by us. So when we're leading the process. But I think it's also because of the positioning, right? When we're comfortable with the process, when we understand the process, we're more likely to actually move with it. So, there are many theories of the change process. Cantor and Cotter are just two of them. Um, 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 but I want to be able to just identify what I think works. I think change very often can be built into the culture of the organization, but can also be built into the fiber of your own working life. And so And it starts off with being eager and open to change, looking for opportunities for change. So it's interesting because Cotter starts his process when the change is going to happen, and Cantor starts her process of going out to look for change. And one of the ways that I find really useful to go out and look for change are these kind of opportunities. When you're engaging with other people in the media from different countries, from different organizations, you hear what they're doing. You think, oh, that's an interesting thing. I wonder if it would work in my organization. When you get a presentation like we're going to get today from Corrinne, to be able to kind of look and so not to take back and implement exactly, but to look at it as an opportunity to brainstorm, to think, to consider what am I going to do with this knowledge that I've got now? How can I use it in my organization? So for me, the key characteristic of a good change manager and a future fit leader is someone who's open to change all the time, looking for opportunity. The next thing is, if we're going to introduce change, if you want to change the way you're working, the way you're telling stories, if you want to do change in your own area of influence, and I'm not talking about changing the whole organization, but maybe even just changing the way your unit works or the way you work with your manager, you need to work on building alliances. You need to work on identifying who would be a good mentor, who would be a key spokesperson for you, who would be a key ambassador for your thoughts, who can really share you with the rest of the organization. And so networking networking is a key skill for building alliances, and I really want you to think of this fellowship as a networking opportunity, but then I also want you to be thinking of what are the networks you need to create in your own environment. And we will talk about this in the coaching process. Once we've developed your career plan, we're going to think about where are the alliances that you need to build. The third thing really about being a good change manager is communicating. And to communicate clearly about change, you really need to have thought through the change process. So, too often, change is introduced by a manager who has an idea but hasn't thought through the idea, hasn't tested the idea, hasn't articulated the idea into an action plan. And so the communication is like inspiring and vivid and wonderful, but it doesn't actually last beyond the launch because the communication about the process isn't clear. There's no clarity about how this is going to be done. There's no low-hanging fruit that's been identified for early wins. And so for me, the process of communication is an action that we need to implement really quickly. And when we do that, we're actually planning not only for success, but we're also planning for failure. We have a plan B, we have a plan C. Heavens, if necessary, we've got a plan Z, right? So that we're going through that process of really understanding where we need to do. And if we have a plan Z, then a key characteristic for managers is really persistence. You need to be able to push through. You need to be able to go through the hard times. You need to be able to continue when people begin to criticize you, when people begin to criticize the process. And then finally, sharing the glory and embedding the change. And I'm going to stop that just for, I'm going to stop that. Apologize. Let me go back there. That so to wrap up, you're going to get a presentation that is much longer than that, but I really feel that today we want to learn from Corrine. But I do want to say this, that when you're looking at the process of change, there are a couple of things that you really want also to be thinking about. That one of the key, there are a couple of key reasons why change fails in organizations, and really what they include are that people don't feel ownership for the change. There's a lot of anxiety. People are worried about their futures. But the most important thing, I think, is organizational culture. And we will talk about that in coming sessions. But today I want to leave you with this thought. You can actually influence change where you are. You don't need to be a manager. You don't need to be. You don't need to have a title. You can influence change from where you are. And why is that important to know? Because when you go into a workplace and you have the fresh eyes of someone new, when you go back into the workplace, you very often have fresh eyes of someone new. When I was a Nieman Fellow at Harvard, in the last month of the fellowship, one of the things that they did was to teach us how to go back into our newsrooms, because after a year of being away, you kind of came back and you kind of like, I know everything new, I know what to do. I then and really, you need to be quite strategic about how you introduce new change, how you introduce your thoughts. And so we're going to be talking about that in coming weeks. But what I want to leave you with the thought today is, think about yourself as a change manager as part of your leadership role, and then ask yourself, what are the kinds of things you need to get comfortable with in order to take that role? So, I've taken 2 minutes of Corinne's time, and I really didn't want to do that. So I'm going to hand over to her straight away, and then we can get questions at the end of the day. So just put your questions down, and we'll do questions at the end of the day. So thanks, everyone. Um, Corinne, I'm going to hand over to you.
Excellent. Hi, everybody. Jen's going to she's going to line up my slides. So the first thing I'm going to say before I start off is this is quite an information-dense slide deck. And, you know, I teach people digital skills stuff, and what I find is that people are sitting there at the bottom of the valley and they're thinking, I'm not even sure how I'm going to get to base camp, and you're going to ask me to climb that thing. Yikes. So, you know, the way we get up a mountain is one foot in front of the other. And there's a really great graphic actually in this slide deck that I think, if I was going to say, if you want to pay attention to any of it, there's one graphic in here, which is to go for low effort, high yield activities. So think about, it's the classic low hanging fruit. What can I do today that's going to move me forward? And, you know, if I had two choices, do this one or that one, which of those two things is going to yield the greatest results? And the things that are really not going to yield a lot of results and involve a lot of effort, Google says deprioritize those. The French would say dans les poubelles, which is French for in the bin. So, so I just wanted to kind of kick off with that, because it is a pretty full-on deck, but you will get a copy of it, and all of anything in it that's blue, there's a link. Just take it slowly and allow yourself time. Okay, so without further ado, let's rock and roll. Next slide, please. Sweet. Okay, so this is from Google News Initiative's Digital Growth Program. There's a bit of information on there, and all of the second paragraph is super useful. Free playbooks, interactive exercises, digital workshops, etc. And so, you know, you can kind of work through it at your own pace, and that's actually how GNI has designed it. Next slide, please. So what I've done, or what I've attempted to do, is to take 3 one-hour workshops on that website and turn them into a 45-minute presentation, which has given me grey hair, tell you what. So those are the 3 topics there. And as I say, the full modules and usefully recordings of the 1-hour workshop. So really treat this 40 minutes as a taster rather than the thing. And the great thing about those and this, if you want, is, you know, you can press pause and come back to it and so on. Excellent. So understanding your audience is the first of those 3 modules. Next slide, please. There are 4 key factors for audience success. So the first one is understanding your readers, their behaviours and their information needs. This helps you respond and become an essential part of their lives. To understand them, you need data. In the digital age, we can get it. And that helps us set goals and objectives for serving that audience. And over time, those objectives, the behaviours that we engage in, start to influence our organisational structures and our strategies and our cultures. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we're going to talk about 4 tools here. You know, if I had to choose, I would say News Consumer Insights is really worth doing if you're not currently in the workplace, and also working your way through the reader revenue playbook. Items 2 and 3 are useful, I think, to let your line manager know about the next time you start a job, because they're really back-end tools, but it's going to make you look good if you know that they exist. Next slide, please. Okie doke. So the first tool we'll talk about is called News Consumer Insights. And what it does is it takes data from Google Analytics. It helps you then turn that information into strategies for getting your readers to visit your site more often and then spend more time on your site when they come. And what you can see there on the left and the right is that regular visits and longer visits help drive revenue from both advertising and building loyalty that builds up a willingness to pay for content, in other words, subscriptions. So that's the sort of process. And down the bottom there is user engagement. And these things are sort of, they go each way, right? So we work with the audience and then they provide us with information that helps us. Next slide, please. Again, information dense slide, summary. News Consumer Insights provides deep dive information about your readers, including personalized recommendations, insights on reader revenue, and metrics that are called value metrics. In other words, there's a relationship between the measurement and the potential for revenue, which is super interesting and useful. So it sort of dovetails engagement, that sort of more empathetic, loyalty, alignment with mission and values, etc., and a willingness to pay for content. Next slide, please. So the cool thing is News Consumer Insights is completely free to use. All you need, and in fact, you could start using it now if you want, if you've got a Gmail address. So you need an email address associated with a Google Analytics account. The tool will work with either the free or paid versions of Google Analytics. And once you've connected a Google account, the report will populate based on your analytics data. So you will need a website to measure it against. That's the thing. You'll see 4 tabs come up on the left-hand side. So actionable recommendations, reader engagement, reader revenue, and usefully video insights. And as I said, all the way through, there's a link. So I've put a live link in the PDF. So next to 2.0 link. So you just literally click on that and it'll take you through it. Next slide, please. I'm going at speed here, friends. So there's a case study. One of them is an organization using it is called the Conversation. It's an Australian-based outlet. They host essays and blogs by academics and experts on issues like climate change, the economy, media policy, and all sorts. And it's largely funded by donations. Next slide, please. So the Conversation used News Consumer Insights and Google Analytics to find out who is most likely to become a new donor and how can they persuade them to pay. They found that the most likely new donor was someone who was signed up to the newsletter. So then the task becomes, how do we get more people to sign up to the newsletter? Because that's the easiest avenue to persuading them to sign up to become a donor. They looked at a couple of ways of letting people know that they have a newsletter. One was website pop-ups, and what they found was that just irritated people. People come via a search on Google to the Conversation, then this pop-up came up and they're like, no, dismiss. The other way they found was the most useful was Google Analytics showed that people scrolled to a certain point, and around 3/4 of the way down the article was the best spot to put a sign up button for the newsletter. By that time, the person was enjoying the content and they might be interested to get more of it via a newsletter. Next slide, please. There are other tools to help you understand your audience. I am using the word audience, but we can talk about it later. I don't think we should use the word audience anymore. Anyway, so this tool here is called the News Tagging Guide. Now, too long don't read. It's a technical thing that allows you to insert what are called tags into the back end of a website to track audience behaviors that you want to measure. Now, what does that look like in practice? It might be, how do people use online video? when they get on your site, what do they click on? What do they scroll around? What's their behavior? And then what do they do if you ask them to subscribe or to unblock advertisements? So it is also free, and you can begin to explore it. I think, maybe spend, if I say how long to spend on each of these things, maybe 10 minutes to sort of have a fish around, and then an hour to get across it in a sort of basic way. Yeah, that will probably do it to start off with. Next slide, please. Okay. Obviously, a big question for all of us is how to make journalism more sustainable financially. Now, digital subscriptions is a way of, is one of the terms for that is reader revenue. There are other forms of revenue, obviously. So there's ad revenue, there's donations. You might host an e-commerce thing on your site, etc. But reader revenue is one form of income. Google has created a playbook to help journalists understand reader revenue better, and it's really useful. And it also has interactive exercises. What I'm going to do, because I can, because it's the internet, is I'm just going to drop 2 links into the chat. I'm going to try and drop 2 links into the chat. There you go. Yeah, so they're just a kind of useful place to get started with the playbook. Really very helpful, well researched. I think, Google has really done a great job in creating content that's accessible and understandable. You just need to work through it a little bit slowly, I find. Next slide, please. Okay, so that was module 1, shorter version of a longer 1-hour workshop. Second one, reach and engagement. So reach is how many people you're reaching, and then deepen engagement is how well they know you, how much they like your content, how willing they are to pay for your stuff, but also, how impactful your journalism is for them. Next slide, please. So I've put into the PDF this slide, which is watch on demand, and the watch there takes you to the recordings of all of these 3 modules that I'm summarizing in this session. And the red arrow there is the one that we're on at the moment. Okay, next slide, please. So here are 4 things that we'll talk about right now. Getting more newsletter subscribers, because some of you are thinking about that, and that is something that you can be doing now if you want to. Making your site more discoverable, social strategies, and video strategies. Next slide, please. Okay, so newsletter acquisition strategy. Basically, this is how do I get more people to sign up? This can help drive reader revenue by bringing your existing audience to your website and also acquiring new readers. What we're finding is that feedback from newsletter subscribers and also podcast listeners, they're a really interesting sort of hybrid between editorial content and advertising, because they can host both without sort of being distracting, right? And so it's quite a useful way of getting feedback from people. However, people need to be able to find the newsletter sign up on your website, and it's got to be easy for them to sign up. Google Analytics will tell you how far people tend to scroll down when they visit your website, and you need to put the sign up button above that. The other thing that GNI recommends is making it possible to sign up with just an email address. So don't give people lots and lots of different fields to fill in, just give them one. You can always get other information like demographics and so on off them later. And the last thing is make your sign up button a warm color. So they've found that warm colors, orangey, yellowy, bluey, orangey, yellowy, reddy ones are better than bluey, greeny, purpley ones. Which I found interesting. And in your sign up, just try and find one really simple way of expressing why people should sign up to your newsletter. So what is the special, FOMO, cool, helpful, useful, sexy, exciting thing that they're missing out on by not getting your newsletter? Next slide. Cool. These are 3 publishers' mobile sites. The module that we're talking about at the moment does look at best-in-class examples on both desktop and mobile. The 3 examples here are Politico, BuzzFeed, and The Guardian. And you can see The sign up button in each case is a nice warm color, and all they're asking in each case is an email address. And I will just drop this in super quickly into the chat, is a link to this case study. But like I say, all of these links are in the PDF. So you could look at it now, but probably better to look at it later. I won't put any more into the chat. I don't want to distract you. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this is what it can look like on a desktop. The publisher here is WRAL. I don't know how to pronounce that, so I'm going to say RAL. Sounds a bit like a cat, RAL.com. So what they did was they redesigned their newsletter sign up on the desktop site. And by just doing that, their newsletter subscribers went up by 15%. So medium effort, high return. The sign up button is blue, which is not great, but it is nice and simple. Next slide, please. Okie dokie. So once someone signs up, you want to engage them immediately, okay? So you can automate or you can write something manually, but you send a follow-up email welcoming them, and this is called onboarding. Google found that some publishers don't do this well or at all, and others do they immediately get in people's faces saying, right, thanks for signing up to our newsletter. Do you want to buy a subscription? And people don't like that either. And not very many outlets were bothering to contact people who have subscribed to a newsletter but never bother to open the emails. And GNI calls these people sleepers. What happens eventually is that a sleeper will go, oh God, I'm getting so much of this newsletter spam, and they unsubscribe. So proactively, you need to wake them up by contacting them and saying, hey, welcome. And that's onboarding. Next slide, please. Jen, could I just ask you for a quick time check? How am I going?
You've got 20 minutes left for
Oh,
this
super.
session. Yeah.
Great. Awesome. Plenty of time.
Thanks, Paula.
Okay. Super. I might, before we get to the next module, I might just check in and see if people have questions. In fact, I might do that now. How are people going? You guys all right? Anyone got any questions? You all happy bunnies? Well, I'm seeing smiles. That's good. That's always good. Okay, cool. All right. I hope you're finding my training approach empowering. I just feel like it's, there's so much information. You get up every morning, you go, oh my God, my inbox is out of control. Some of you guys have got kids, I don't, but my sister looks like roadkill all the time. So I totally get it. You just, choosing one thing each day is enough. So choosing little things is really important. Okay, so this bit here, just going to get rid of the chat. And I'm going to find out, where am I? Optimizing search. Yeah, here we are. Are we on slide 21, Jen? Never mind, don't worry. We're all good. Yep, cool. Okay, so we're going to have a look at, back. Optimizing search discovery, that's what we want. So now we'll have a look at how Google tools can help make your news website easier to find. And that means optimizing it for discoverability, which is such a clunky word. Just making it easier to find would have been better, for discovery in Google search. There's quite a lot of information in this slide, but there's a few things that are really neat, actually. There's a thing called the Rich Results Testing Tool, which is part of News Consumer Insights. Basically, what you do is you paste the URL of a website into this tool, and you get back a little report that tells you, is this going to come back close to the top of search results or not? It'll tell you if you've got any errors. You might then need to Google what those errors are in order to fix them. It'll also tell you whether your page is using all the right code and track your results with a search console. Now, you might be using a third-party provider like Squarespace or Wix or Weebly, etc., in which case you will more likely be needing to optimize for metadata as opposed to the actual design of the thing. But if you're building something in WordPress, for instance, or if you're at a news outlet, you might want to engage more with some of the deep stuff in this tool. So don't worry about it too much right now. It's very useful to people managing online news and online news websites, but it's nice to know that there is help available. Next slide, please. Excellent. Okay, so an organisation called Independent News and Media PLC used the Rich Results tool, and what they were looking for was, can we get more people to come? They did so, and their website traffic increased by 10% just by putting into practice the feedback that they got from the Rich Results tool, which is just so easy. What a simple thing to do. Next slide, please. Okie doke. The next thing we're going to talk about is your social share buttons. Now, the advice from Google is to make them easy to find, and that might mean having them in more than one spot on the same web page. Now, there's a kind of two things here. One is it's good to have all the social share buttons that your readers use, but if you've got readers in both, a country that uses Weibo and a country that uses Twitter, or you've got people who are using WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger, you can quite quickly run out of it. Can look messy, right? So what you can do is create a little pop-up that will then avoid you having to add them all in one spot. Just go down one, next slide, please, Jen. Oh no, back up again, please. Thanks, excellent. Okay, so another bit of advice is to use the actual brand colors. You can see at the top in that little black banner there that they've used the brand colors used by the various social media platforms. People recognize the colors as well as the shapes, and it helps drive clicks. I am going to drop something in. No, I won't. I'll just mention here where it says this little bit of text. I will drop this in. It's an external link. Just sort of copy it and bookmark it somewhere. It's just quite a nice 10 quick ways to increase your website conversion rate that I found I just found it quite useful. Conversion just means getting people to do something that you want them to do. Super. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, video. This is the last thing that we were going to cover of those 4 strategies. How do we get people to press play more often? And also, how do we get them to watch to the end? So first of all, you want people to see your videos. So if the video content is good, put it towards the top of the page, above what's called the fold. In other words, what's visible on the site when you open it. Everything that's below that is called the fold, kind of like a fold in a book. So you want it above that. The other way you can do it, if you've got great video content, but you're a text site, and really you want to put the video content somewhere further down more often than not. An example of that might be The Guardian, the BBC would be another one, is to add a vertical on your website at the top, list of verticals, called video. So just put all your video in one place. Another thing is to make sure the video player is big enough. And really great tip here, if you can set it to autoplay, and even better, to show snippets of the next cool video on the same topic, related topic, that actually drives video consumption behavior really well. And I don't know about you guys, YouTube does that, and that is why I consistently go to bed at 2 o'clock in the morning rather than 11 o'clock at night, because I find out just going down some rabbit hole on YouTube. Next slide, please. We all do it. Okay, this is a case study from Australia from 7 News, which is a TV station, so they've got lots of video. So they put the video at the top of their stories, often because the journalists are then transcribing what was in the video for the text version. So it's sort of the opposite of a newspaper. The video is high quality, and underneath it, they put related videos, and then they put the text story. Now, that format might not work at all for an online text site. So again, going back into news consumer insights and Google Analytics, understanding your audience, your users, consumers, customers, and clients, will help you get the data to make sure that it's in the right spot. It's like, what do they click on? Do they scroll for a text story before watching the video, for example? If they do that, then maybe the video player belongs further down. It's just really getting this information, which, you know, we can now. Next slide, please. Any questions before we go on to building an audience-centric culture? Happy? Cool. Okay, I shall crack on. Great. Okay, so we're going to have a look at 4 strategies to put the audience at the center of everything that you do. How do you set clear and actionable goals and metrics? Again, some of these things are things that Paula's working with you on, setting goals and metrics for your own life. But also then those strategies are actually super useful for setting you up for when you are next in a working environment that's maybe got other people in it, because those things influence culture as well. Creating audience research capabilities, right? I think, you know, we know that we need to study the audience. Some of it is, well, how do we do that? And then third is reinforcing audience centricity across your organization, and be amazed how often that is not the case. So again, I think this mindset shift of engaging with the course content of this program will really set you up well for the gigs that you're doing now and into the future. Okie doke, next slide, please. All right, you might remember this graphic from earlier in this session. So for digital journalism to perform well, it has to engage its readers, partly to sell advertising if you work for a commercial outlet, and partly to drive reader revenue. The first, as we've covered, requires people to come and see your website, in other words, find it, and that results in page views. And the second requires them to care about your outlet. So they build brand loyalty and form an emotional bond with you if you're a freelancer, or your outlet. And you can build goals around all of these things and then create metrics to measure your performance. Next slide, please. Okay, when I looked at this slide, I didn't make these slides. It took me a minute to kind of go, oh, okay. So maybe just rest with that for a second. 5 metrics to grow your audience. So not just the ones that you've got, but new people, is looking at how many people come at least once a month. How many people could you be targeting overall? For example, the residents of your city or geographic area, or people who are interested in the niche topic that you write about. How quickly is the number of people living in your area and visiting your website growing? What proportion of those people are loyal users? And Google defines those, broadly speaking, and you might tinker with that a bit, as people who come at least twice a month. And then what proportion are brand lovers? They're people who show up every 2 to 3 days. Where have they come from? Is it via, bookmarking your site? Do they come via social channel? Have they bounced in from a newsletter? If one of those is performing better than the others or worse than the others, that's a moment to think, do I need to take some action? Next slide, please. And then here, keep back. Yep, thanks. Here are 5 metrics to focus on around engagement, keeping people coming back, and then moving people along from being occasional to loyal to brand lovers. Obviously, not everyone will be that. So some examples of targets or goals that you could set. Starting at the top, you could aim to get your existing readers to visit your website at least twice a month. You could encourage them to read at least 4 articles a month. You could aim to get them to spend at least 2 minutes and 20 seconds on your website when they do visit. That's good information for advertisers. You could aim to find out what percentage of them are unique. In other words, maybe they're using a desktop and a mobile, but you want to find out which ones are one and the same person. So you get a sense of who your unique users are, because that helps you personalize the content. And you could aim to boost your newsletter subscriptions by 5% over a set period, e.g. 6 months. Now, all of these things are what's called SMART goals, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. And it's the difference between I want to learn yoga and I'm going to learn how to do 2 poses per week with a view to knowing how to do 8 poses by the end of June. One is measurable, one isn't. Next slide, please. Jen? Jen, you still there?
Just a minute. I think this is
Frozen?
freeze. Okay.
There we go. Yay. I thought it was me. I'm on someone else's Wi-Fi at the moment. So, okay, cool. Okie doke. No matter whether you are working in a newsroom or you're a freelancer, you can learn to carry out audience research. In other words, building your capability to create audience data. Tools you can use, and they're all on that slide there: surveys, Google Forms, super useful, interviews. These just, there's quite a few other tools that are mentioned in the longer version of this workshop. But what these do is help you build up what's called personas, which is sort of like an ideal or typical member of your target audience. Then you can identify the jobs that you need to do to engage better with existing audiences and new people just like that to grow your audience. And then finally, you can put the jobs in order based on whether they are a priority or not. And my favorite slide is coming up. Next slide, please. Oh, no, it's not. Wait. That's okay. Leave it on here for a sec. I built it up. It's not this one. It's coming up. Okay, so deciding what your priority goals are depends on your business model. So if you're a commercial outlet and you need to increase advertising revenue, you might focus on the blue goals. By the way, the blue ones here are not live links, they're just blue. If you need to build reader revenue, then you sort of might want to prioritize the green goals there. And the yellow ones are things that everyone should be prioritizing. Simply put, bringing people to your site and getting them to spend time there. So we all want that. Okie doke. Now, next one. Jen, next slide. Oh, is it frozen again? It's not me, it's Singapore. Hey, this is such a great graphic. I love this. I want this pinned to my bathroom mirror. Just, everything takes a certain amount of effort, right? So we try and work out what's low effort, high value. That's your top priority. So that could just be as simple as change the color of the button on your website for newsletter signups from blue to red. Tick, done. It's low effort, high value. If a survey will help you understand whether your audience likes your existing content and whether they want more stories about some topics and less about others, which is called a content audit, that's actually quite a lot of effort, but it will deliver high value. So you might make that a medium priority. And then jobs that are easy to do but won't deliver much value, they're low priority. It's like, oh, well, don't take 5 minutes, but it's not going to be very useful. Okay, well, and then jobs that take loads of effort and won't deliver much value can be moved to the bottom of your to-do list. Now, before you move off this slide, I just want to inject the phrase human-centered design into this conversation. It's something that we're seeing a lot of in journalism conversations. And basically what it is put the user first, humans first, right? I just did a project earlier this year and last year with someone who is a human-centered designer. And I've never heard anyone ask me the question why so many times in my life. So I'd say, we should do this. What we had to do was design a self-assessment tool for a research outlet. And the research outlet came to us and said, we want the tool to look like this. And of course, in their heads, they'd built it before, they had this idea of build it before people came, right? And my collaborator, Tafida, who's epic, she'd say, but why? And they go, oh, because we think that's how it should be, is what the answer was. And she said, well, we should do some user research to understand whether that's actually what people want, whether they even want this thing, and if so, what they would get out of it. So, when you ask yourself, why am I thinking about launching a newsletter, for example, really ask yourself that question. What's in it for the audience that I serve and me? That's the win-win thing, right? If you can't really answer that question, you need to spend a little bit more time on those things, because launching something new can be high effort. And so you need to ask yourself, is it also going to deliver you some value, and be able to articulate that? You can say, I don't know, and suck it and see. But, you know, setting out some goals, some SMART goals as to what success looks like, what does good look like, helps you determine whether that effort is worthwhile. Okie doke, I've got 4 minutes, but I can do it. Okay, next slide, please. Yes. All right. 1 sec. So goals, metrics, and data should all be shared across your organization. Now, if you're at home at the moment, that's okay. Understanding how do we make priority goals actionable, useful to know. So reports for senior editors and department heads, dashboards for reporters to see how their stories are performing, the sorts of things that help a news organization provide high quality information to the communities that you serve and see how you're doing. And it can take a little while to set it up, but absolutely, that's high effort, high value for an organization. Next slide, please. Okay. If you have Google Analytics, you can start using News Consumer Insights. This will give you ideas and suggestions to improve your performance across all of your audience goals. And that might be something as straightforward as a newsletter around a topic that you feel there's a demand for. Next slide, please. Okay, you've seen this before. I won't mention it again. You can watch longer versions of all these webinars. Next slide, please. Do you have any questions? Because I've just reached the end of my presentation. Comments, feedback, thoughts, observations? Yep.
Yeah. And,
I think that's really true, Lily. I mean, that's the thing is, I need some time to sit with that. That's a beast. But, you know, just do one thing. Like, even if you said, okay, well, over the next 2 weeks, I might just click on some of those links.
Yeah.
That's better than not doing any of them. Someone did have, there was something, hang on, got to bring up the chat. How is marketing penetration measured? Only within Google's database? Yeah, look, it is a Google tool. So it's not the only animal in the zoo. You know, and there are proprietary products as well. And of course, you know, Facebook has some things as well, like CrowdTangle, for instance. You know, to get us, there's what do they call it? The water cooler tool. You know, what are people talking about? I mean, I feel one of the things that would be really interesting for you guys to do as a cohort over the time that you have left for this project is actually maybe to divvy up some of these tools and think which is the most useful. You know, there's a lovely saying that I came across some time back is that you don't ask 10 people to carry something that's really heavy. So why do we ask 10 people to try and solve the same problem? Right? So maybe, you know, that's dumb. 10 brains are better than one. So, you know, maybe, you know, Pei Chin might have a look at the news tagging guide and go, yes, no, useful, not useful. You know, someone else might pull out some of the useful chapters from the reader playbook. I mean, I'm just suggesting you might go, no, that's not how we want to do it. But I'm just saying collectives are good. Any other? So more trackers make more sense for a website if doing data gathering intensive strategies. Hang on, I just have to think about that for a second. I think the short answer is yes. I mean, basically, you know what? There's all this interesting conversation at the moment about iOS 14.5, you know, that it's part of this grumble between Apple and Facebook that iOS 14.5 allows you to switch off app tracking. And I saw yesterday someone tweeted out a screenshot of they'd accessed Instagram and Instagram was saying, you have to help keep Instagram free. Right? Like flagging that, oh, maybe we might charge users. And you think, well, hang on, they're not going to, why would they do that? Instagram and Facebook are basically advertising platforms that rely on our social lives to make their content sexy. They'll never charge users. But that being said, you know, we've just come out of this experience in Australia where they switched Facebook off for 2 weeks, which was interesting. But, you know, the point is, Lainey, to answer your question, we are being tracked all the time by tools. Some of those tools are available to us. We're the good guys, right? We're journalists. So we are using that information to try and understand people better so they can make informed decisions about their lives. And that's the value of what we give people. Yeah.
Corrinne, shall we take a break for tea?
Oh,
Take 10
yeah.
minutes until 9:30. I don't want to take too much more because when we come back, Corinne's actually going to do a session on how to engage your audience on social platforms, and it's also going to look more at personal branding, so how you can get the most out of your personal brand presence on social media. So let's come back at 9:30 for the next session. Thanks, everyone.
Hello. Are we all back? Got a cup of tea? Sweet. Okay. All right. I'm so glad. Good. So this bit's the fun bit. It's a nice way to end the day. Yeah, and we're just going to crack on. So thanks for sharing those slides there, Jen. Excellent. Let's go. There we go. Okay, that's me. Boring. Keep going. Sweet. Okay, super. So just before we zip on, one thing I wanted to say about this is I've sent a PDF of these slides to Jen with live links in them. And what I would ask is that you just treat those for your personal use. They're kind of, you know, company IP, but it means that you can then kind of go back and look at what each individual tool does and then make a decision about whether it's useful. Does that make sense? Super duper. So please don't send it to everyone you know, because that would be tricky. But I love teaching this subject because I think personal branding, particularly during this time, is how we need to interact with pretty much everybody, right? Like I'm interacting with you in a digital format right now. So what we're going to cover is defining your personal brand, and that will take a little bit of time, and then tips for what to do on social, and then some creative tools. Next slide, please. Super. So what is a personal brand? It's information about yourself that helps really, helps us think about how do we get a gig, how do we find gigs that we like that, tick boxes for us, in terms of the impact that we want to have and the meaning that we want to derive from our lives. Really, that to me is what a personal brand is. Next slide, please, Jen. It helps you demonstrate that you have expertise in topics that you want to report on, and that's so that you've got leverage when you write to an editor to say, let me write about this thing, and also without you tipping over into influencer territory, it says to an employer or a collaborator that you can help them reach a wider audience through you. It also matters because people look people up on social before hiring. And I have to say, I'm always a little bit concerned about people who, for example, don't have a Twitter account. If they're working in a Western newsroom, like, how do you survive? But I also am equally concerned if someone's LinkedIn profile hasn't been updated for, some years and they've got a completely different job. Your brand comes with you when you change jobs. It might adjust a little bit over time. So 10 years ago, my brand was journalist and now my brand is trainer. And there were times where that sort of overlapped a bit. So I had to think about that. And then online matters matters more during the pandemic. So that's basically why we're doing this. Next, please. Your brand lives in multiple places. So it lives on your website. It lives on social platforms that are used by your audience. That can include, sorry, just pop up. Yes, good idea to use the WordPress. I agree, Junie. Social media platforms used by your audience, and it also sits on things like business cards, stationery, and invoices. And in fact, you find me, I do have time for this, by the way. I just want to show you what a crack up. I thought I was never going to use my business cards ever again, but I'm going to a thing. And so that's my business card. Boring back bit, but on the back I found one that does photographic printing, and that picture there is on my website. And it was a tenner, $10. So good. So cheap to get web business cards done these days. And stationery and invoices. And you can see up in the top right-hand corner there, there's a little yellow thing. That's my company logo. And you know what? I just literally made it, honestly, I made it on Canva. I am a cheapskate's cheapskate. I hate spending money on marketing materials. So I chose a color that I liked, and then I exported it as a high-res thing, literally that. And then I spent half an hour creating templates for things like invoices and, you know, course lists and so on. And I just put it on all of them and just makes it look cool. The end. Never have to think about it again. Next slide, please. Well, I have to think about it at some point when I rebrand. Okay, so this is a 60-second exercise. I'm literally going to give you 60 seconds and you don't have to share it. But I would like you to write down, forget 10, that's way too many, 5 topics that you're interested in. So if it was cooking, then we're thinking about the keywords or brandy words, the cool words that might go with that. So just think, at the moment, we're just thinking about parenting, for example, or cooking, or kite flying. So think about 5 things that you're interested in. We're going to take a minute. So it's 17:37. I will start speaking again. Okay, 60 seconds feels like a long time and no time, doesn't it, when you're on an online meeting? Feels like forever because dead air. I'm an ex-broadcaster and it's like, oh, a minute. Anyway, next slide, please, Jen. Okay, super. Now, take those 5 and cross out 2 of them. The things that really resonate with you, your values and interests. So mine are news tech, mobile journalism, and media development. And no matter who I'm talking to or what I'm thinking about, I try and get across to people those are things that I have expertise in. So I'll give you a minute, and so I'll start talking again at 17:39 because I think I've used up half of this minute. So what are your 3 brandy words or phrases? Sorry. Have you got them, folks? If anyone, I might just take a couple. If anyone would like, I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but would anyone like to put their mic on and, oh yes, you can, Pechin, if you want to type it there, or put your mic on and say it. Either is fine. Super. So Pechin has got 1. She's interested in mental health. Oh, mental health, sorry, now I can see it. Storytelling and resilience. Journalism, technology and social media. Okay. Anyone want to put on a mic? Don't have to, can keep typing. Okay. Cool, cool, cool. Right. Now, here's the thing. Those of you who've said journalism or storytelling, yep, food, tech, media landscape. Super. Okay, so food and tech, kind of they're sufficiently specific, I think. Journalism is a bit broad because it's a crowded market, people describing themselves as journalists. Excellent. So storytelling, food and tech. Oh, I've got 2 storytelling, food, tech people. You guys should form a media conglomerate right there. So then think, you know, when you're thinking about those words, think, what is it that an employer or a collaborator is going to want to hear from me? So maybe not right now, but just go back and rethink that exercise. Really, look, you know, they say the future of journalism is collaborative, and I think that's true, but it is also an elbows first environment where you're trying to sort of be registered by people that you want to work with or for. And so just refining those words a little bit will super help you. And it'd be the sorts of things that go in your bio and explain your expertise. So let's keep that exercise in the back of our minds. If we get time at the end, we might redo that as we go along this thing. So that now I've said that, just go, oh yeah, I see what you mean. And then we can go, okay. Next slide, please. No, forward, not backward, forward. Onwards and upwards, Jen. Bloody PowerPoint, it's just not playing ball, is it? Right, okay, so here we go, 2 case studies, real people. And I want to, you know, praise both, but I think we can immediately visually see that the one on the right is stronger. So Putu has put their product specialist, loves marketing research, baking and cooking, has mentioned that they've written what looks like possibly a book, 90 insights for marketing, finalist of. So basically said, I'm a rock star around these topics, but hasn't put up an image at the back. Would have been great to think, okay, maybe there's a picture of her receipt, or sorry, yeah, it's a her. Sorry, I've got my reading glasses on, but I need to renew my prescription. Sad. You know, so maybe an image of her receiving that award, maybe the cover of that book, something that says, ah, cool. On the right, Stephanie, who's written a very long name in Twitter. I don't encourage that, by the way. Anyway, award winning. Okay, if you've actually won awards, it's always good to start off with award winning. No Dig Organic Home and Garden, The Creative Kitchen, talks, workshops. So she's got a side hustle as a trainer. So that's kind of interesting too. And she's found space. Interesting differences there too. One of them's put their town. The other one has put their geographic location. And Stephanie has taken advantage of the fact that you can put your website in your Twitter profile. So just that kind of, I never ever, when I'm doing social media auditing, I never find anyone who's done everything perfectly. Right? So it's all good. There's always room for improvement, including me. I'll tell you a horror story in a minute. Next slide, please. Forward, darling. Okie doke, cool. So social platforms, what they can do for us, they can do all of these things. They can promote your storytelling. They can promote other professional services that you offer. They can help drive traffic to your blog or website. They can help you network. So just having a website means that you can apply for certain funds, for example. You can't put in for some grants if you don't have a website. Irritating. And they can help you build a community or audience. So they can kind of tick a whole bunch of boxes for you. Next slide, please. Okay, so my top tips. Look, I can't remember if it's the Bible or Shakespeare. They used to have this show in England which was called Any Questions, and most of the quotes either came from the Bible or Shakespeare. But one of these quotes is, "There's nothing new under the sun," right? So one of the ways to get an idea of how to brand yourself is to find people with a brand that you like. And then over a couple of weeks, look at the keywords that a few people, not just one person, few people, what keywords are they using? What are they posting? How often are they posting? And that helps you come up with something that's sort of similar at the same time as it's really got to feel unique and resonant with you. You've got to feel like, yeah, that's me. It's only ever going to be 90% good, especially if you're a perfectionist. You're going to feel like it's only 80% good. And I hear your pain, but just something that's pretty accurate. Then farm it out to friends and colleagues. Ask people to give their opinions. They'll probably ask them to be straight with you. but to, give you straight feedback, but it'll probably wind up being better than you think. And then you just iterate and improve. Next slide. Social posting. Posting content that targets people who you want to work with or you want to collaborate with. I think that's really what our social platforms are for when we work in the media. Don't post content that isn't consistent with your brand. I really have to hold off and not post stuff about Australian politics. It's very hard for me not to do that. So posting deliberately and purposefully. I am going to post this thing. Try to engage with other influential accounts without being sort of a hanger-on, to be useful or to retweet things, and go for what's called the 80-20 rule. So 80% professional and 20% or less that is personal. You tweet everything that crosses your mind. And today is the last day that you do that. Okay, next slide. Oh, look, I'm going to say that's partly a generational thing, okay? I don't, and I find that a lot of the students that I work with, particularly university students, do, but then it resonates with their community, resonates with their community. So I'm not going to say don't, I'll just say do so deliberately and purposefully. Okay. Social media bios, use your real name, what you do and where you work, things that are of interest to you, if you plan to post about those. If not, don't include it. That real estate's really precious. You've got 160 characters on Twitter. Think about keywords that people are going to look for, and include a link to your website and contact information, if possible. Next slide, please. You want to be discoverable, consistent, and trustworthy. So consistent, same handle on all platforms if you can, relevant photos and cover art, similar fonts, colors, and images. Oh no, one of those is, never mind. Could you just keep going, please, Jen? Thanks, excellent. Sorry, because this is being recorded and one of those profiles, the black spot was not where it should have been. Anyway, point is, each of the profiles on the previous slide were real ones, and I don't mean any disrespect to anybody. I think that if I create a LinkedIn profile and it doesn't have information about me in a background image, I might as well not be on it. If the last time I updated it was 2017, that's not good. That's a career liability. So I need to be on that stuff. Profile photos, get one done every 3 to 5 years, and it's worth blowing some money on a professional one. It's depending upon the tax laws in your country, it can be a tax deduction. All of this stuff is a tax deduction. In Australia, it's all tax deductible. Medium close up, because most people are going to look at it on a mobile screen. Try not to use emojis, and think about using the same profile same photo on all of your profiles, right? Because that way it's consistent. It's like, oh yeah, that's Lainey, and that's Lainey. And if you have a common name, that's also really helpful. It's like, oh yeah, that's her on Twitter and that's also her on LinkedIn. Okay, super. Yeah, next slide, please. So Latika Burke is a journalist who's been working for the Sydney Morning Herald forever. She's currently based in London. And you can see there that her Facebook, LinkedIn, one of them is also her page, I think. They're just relatively consistent. Her Instagram, which is on the right-hand side, Instagram doesn't allow you to have a background image. And then the bottom right is the YouTube. And I think for her, YouTube is a bit of a lost opportunity. She hasn't used cover art on her YouTube, which she could. But all of these other ones, it's really solid. And you can see there on her LinkedIn that, contact information, she's put everything there, which is publicly accessible, by the way, which is why I feel comfortable including it in this slide deck. But the point is, she's making it very easy for people to get in touch with her as a journalist. And yeah, and she's used things like messaging buttons and so on. So she's really thought about it. Next slide, please. Okay, so Matt Navarra is there are not very many people I'd say social media guru about, but he is a social media guru, super bright. He's gone for a slightly different way of doing this. So on some of his spaces, he's got his branding. On some of his spaces, he's got other things. So I guess my point is, one, he's got a massive following, and that's because he is known to have a lot of expertise and he delivers consistently. He's got a great newsletter and he's got a great podcast, or he was doing podcasting, So it's not a catastrophe that his branding is a little bit all over the shop. And in fact, you know, by having a picture of him on the BBC TV, which is the top right, that's a win. I would say he should also put that on his Facebook page and get rid of his branding, right? Maybe his logo goes in the bin and he replaces it with that picture of him on the BBC, right? On Twitter, he's got enter your job below social media manager, and he's put in everything there and used emojis. And then the bottom right's interesting. I've got views about YouTube. The YouTube picture there, it's not formatted quite though. It's a bit squishy. I can immediately see it's matte, but it's squishy, but it's him outside number 10. So maybe that's the best picture he had of him outside the Prime Minister's office, right? So just look, again, this is what I'm saying, is looking at people who are doing interesting stuff and then thinking, what do I learn from that? Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to attempt, yes, I can do it. 5 platforms in 20 minutes. Let's go. So Facebook, a page for your business, brackets optional, end brackets. Groups for your communities can be useful. Personal posts, think about 80-20. Otherwise, just make it friends only. Not sure what I think about Facebook. I mostly post to my feed because I have lots of friends who include former trainees, and I have a page that I just never have time to update. And only 100 people like it because I don't want to harass the 1,500 friends that I have to say, would you please like my Facebook page? So I haven't done anything much with it. It never delivers me any work. So at some point, probably this year, I'm going to kill it. LinkedIn is a page. LinkedIn's great. LinkedIn offers you both a feed, and then you can also, if you have a company, you can set up a company page. Doesn't hurt to do it. That way you get to display the icon of your company. It's faffy, but it's worth doing. You can post, you can also put up articles, and you can join LinkedIn groups. Twitter's great for news gathering, especially lists, links to your work, and direct messaging as well. We'll talk about that. And then Instagram, you know, Instagram is a closed ecosystem. It doesn't want you to leave. I have to confess, I'm not great at Instagram. But I see that a lot of people do use it to drive business. If you can find a really good way of using it to drive journalism web traffic, my hat will come off to you. It is good for Instagram stories and Instagram TV. So if you're doing a lot of video, it's worth putting it there. But worth it for what? Exposure. We know about the journalist that died of exposure. In other words, is it delivering value? Is it delivering money? Basically. So just being on platforms is not necessarily, you've got to have a why. Why are you there? YouTube, we'll talk about YouTube. I like YouTube a lot. Next slide. Thank you. Okay, so Facebook gives you the option for a personal account and a professional page. For both, you can add a website and job history. Try not to post deeply personal content, and do post video if you have it. If you have a page, you can also add a call to action button, e.g. email me or message me or donate to my cause, and you have access to page insights to track engagement. Poster child that I've put there is Jennifer Brandel, who runs We Are Harkin, and I think her page is brilliant, actually. And also, sorry, hang on a sec. No, wait. That's her account. I don't think she has a page. That's her personal account. Almost everything she posts is public, and she thinks about, am I going to post anything that's deeply personal, and she tends not to. Next slide, please. So Facebook's great, particularly for joining and using groups. I belong to a lot of groups, and I find them extremely useful for both finding out information to teach courses like this, and also to a certain extent for getting gigs. I don't join groups that I don't own and post stuff about selling my services because that's rude, but I'll post things that's useful, and then people tend to get in touch. Facebook has some great courses. It's called Blueprint. And Jen has, for this slide deck, I haven't embedded links. I've sent Jen a PDF or a Word document, which has got links to everything that I'm mentioning. So you can work your way through courses if you want. And you can also, in some countries, not all, the Philippines is one of them, register as a journalist. They just introduced it last year. And the idea there is that, it's supposed to focus on things around journalism safety and privacy. So just wanted to mention that that's a newish thing that they're doing. The courses are excellent. And then I've put a link in the document of 10 must join Facebook groups for journalists. Okay. Is this okay? Is this helpful? I feel a little time pressed and I'm trying not to. So I'm just going to take a breath and say, does anyone have any questions? Okie doke. Good. Yeah. So this is Latika's work page and personal profile. So her contact information is on her page, other socials and branding. Her personal profile, now that background image there is something that she also put on Instagram and is publicly visible. Otherwise, I wouldn't put it in this slide deck. Her personal profile is more personal. I personally feel it's fine to put content on Facebook. If you feel that you're established and your brand supports that, by all means. Otherwise, if you're job hunting, I would steer away from it. So one of those things actually means doing a bit of an audit of things that you've posted in the past. My generation's protected from this. I was 20. I finished my 30s, actually, almost. I was 34 when Facebook launched. So none of those bad perms that I got in the 1980s are anywhere near the internet, and thank God for that, right? So maybe it's worth going back through content and thinking, what's the stuff that comes up and what do you need to just get rid of? But making the most use of your material, your platforms to sell the best of you. Yeah, we all have. Did you really, Junie? Did you have a bad perm? Awesome. What about you, Paula? Did you have one? Yeah, we all had one. Isn't that amazing? Cuts across countries, cultures. We all had a bad perm in the 1980s. All right. Next slide, please. Instagram. Instagram offers you one or the other, personal account or business account. So for Instagram, I think if you're going to use it for work, then a business account is a no-brainer. You can still post personal stuff to a business account, but you do get access to insights. You have one link and one link only, which is the one in your bio. You can change it, right? So it might be listen to my latest podcast, find me on LinkedIn. You'll see news outlets will change it all the time to show featured content. There are also a couple of services that you can use, both of which you can kind of use for free. One's called Linktree and the other one is called Link in Bio. And basically they will drive traffic to either a list of recent stories or a copy of your Instagram feed where you can click on the squares and they open up in separate web pages. So have a look at both of those. Business accounts gives you access to things like how old, what is the gender, and where are the people that follow me. And it's also kind of useful again, what do other people like you posting? What types of content are they putting up? What sorts of hashtags are they using and how often are they posting? It's hard now that I think likes are coming back. They hid them for a while, but it seems like they're coming back. But it's hard to see what's resonating. Sometimes the easiest way to find out if you're posting the right thing on LinkedIn, on Instagram, is to DM your followers and say, it's great that you're liking my content. What would you like to see more of? Next slide, please. So Anna Codrea-Rado, she's often used as a case study, actually. She's got a really good social media presence across all platforms. She's a British-based freelancer. Her profile includes what she does, how to get in touch with her, She obviously uses Instagram stories and highlights. Those circles at the bottom there are when people save a story, which otherwise will disappear within 24 hours. They'll add it as a highlight. You can also always go back into your archives and put those up. And she's done a good job there of classifying her Instagram highlights into posts around her book, posts around other things that sell her brand. One of the things she's into is dogs, hashtag freelance, and then freelance work and other stuff. I'll pick up questions at the end, but I will pick them up. And she uses Linktree. So you see here, linked or at da 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 da. That will take you to the link to recent articles. An alternative to it is link in bio. Next slide, please. Kinds of stuff to post. So Abigail Edge is a journalist and trainer. She's a person, one of the co-founders of the Society for Freelance Journalists, SFJ, Society for Freelance Journalists, which is open to anyone to join. And it's set up by a couple of freelancers in the UK. So Abigail, John Crowley is another one, Laura Oliver, etc. What you can see in Abigail's feed is content about cats and animals, does well on Insta, but also stuff about her as a journalist and as a trainer. Natasha Mitchell, by contrast, is an Australian-based radio journalist and public speaker. She's a former colleague of mine. And so you can see that she posts about her dog. She also posts quite a lot about the sorts of events that she's able to do under lockdown, and some of the other things that resonate with her, including mental health and gardening. She's a mad keen gardener. So you get a sense of Natasha's brand, and you can see just by sitting them side by side that they're different people doing different stuff. Yep. Next slide, please. Cool. Twitter bio. It is a mini CV. Short, clear, what you do. Tag your current employer. If you've worked for previous brands that are well known, tag them as well. Add your website. That could be your website. It could be your LinkedIn. It could be whatever you like. Make your cover art relevant. And I don't understand why more journalists don't set their DMs to open. We should be easy to catch up with. Now, if you, okay, I get it, trolling. So that's that sort of balance. But my DMs are set to open, and I have a very vigorous block policy. So if someone even tries to get into my DMs and it's not relevant, it's like, see ya. But my DMs are open. Both of the examples on the right, I think, are great. Natasha's one has got events that she's chaired. John has got a Banksy poster, Banksy picture with "There is always hope." But I like both of them as examples of how they've used Twitter bios. So Tash has gone for host, founder, maker, science friction, which was a radio program and public events series. Then she said which radio program she used to host, and which one she's hosting now. And she's hashtagged a couple of things, tagged a couple of things. She used to be ex-vice president of the WFSJ, which is the World Federation of Science Journalists. So I've got a really quick idea of who Tash is just by reading those things. Okay, next slide, please. What to post? Links to your work. Links to other work aligned to your topic. So social is about sharing, and it's not just celebrating yourself, it's celebrating others. Demonstrate, thought leadership is a funny little title, isn't it? But, it's just saying, I know about this stuff. Try and keep it positive. I personally, people say, oh, Twitter is a dumpster fire, it's so toxic, blah, blah, blah. If you personally get up every day and say, I'm going to post positive stuff, well, at least you're making a happier noise, but also people gravitate more towards positive content on social. People are more likely to share it. The end. Never tweet when you're angry or drunk. So open the bottle, close the laptop is what they say. I will come to the comments in a sec. Try and use lists. Lists are super useful. There's a guide to creating lists in the document I've sent you guys. The thing about Twitter, I've been on Twitter since 2011, and I've changed not just my job, but my career 3 times in that time. So I was a journalist, then I was a journalist and trainer, and I've also done some academic stuff. It's all just been, it was, so lists help me keep my, and I've moved countries twice. Anyway, long story. So the thing about lists is that my news feed on Twitter is a mess. There's random news outlets from the Pacific Islands and there's blah, but lists help me keep it really clean. So lists are good. Then you've got to remember to look at them. So set that as a calendar action. Next slide, please. LinkedIn. Okay, I want to bang on about LinkedIn for a sec because journalists tend not to use LinkedIn very well. Advertising people use LinkedIn brilliantly, and it's like a parallel universe. So journalists are great on Twitter and terrible on LinkedIn, and advertising people are brilliant on LinkedIn and terrible on Twitter. So like it's in Australia, we've got two streets, George Street and Pitt Street, and it's like you either shop in one or the other. So for LinkedIn, what you will need, no, stop saying that, Jeanette. You're not terrible on everything. Just this is good. This is like, now we're at base camp, and you go, okay, got one foot in front of the other. So first step on your way up Everest is get a good headshot photo. You can get a custom URL. In other words, instead of getting the URL that's got number, you can just click on something to get a custom URL. If you've got a common name, think about, rather than saying, let's say, Lainey Yeo 67, think about, Lainey Yeo journalist, Liu Li Li, whatever the topic is that you write about, for example. Include your contact information. You don't have to put your phone number there, but think about, something that's not just LinkedIn. The headline describes you, not your current job. Right? So that's the bit where it say host, founder, It's not, journalist at blur. It's not, between gigs. Never put that. And your about section can be quite long. Mine's way too long. Anyway, but it's basically your expertise and career highlights. And then you get into your job list. Right? So just maximizing the opportunities to connect. So your about is the most important real estate about you. Next slide, please. Okay, so your posts look like Facebook posts, and they can include links and photos. They can also include PDFs. So one of the things that I did have, it's currently out of date, so I don't have, but I will have, is a PDF of my course list, which people can download, right? You can also post articles, which look like blogs, and you can embed links, videos, and images into those. So they look exactly like a Medium post. You can copy paste straight from your blog to LinkedIn. Do you want to do that? Have a think about it. You can also post straight, like copy paste Medium to LinkedIn. You might want to just tinker a little bit. I'm not sure to what degree either platform views that behavior, right? Best thing is, with everything in digital, suck it and see, give it a go. And, but articles I think are quite useful and people don't tend to use them. I would never post commercially available journalism as an article. That would be silly. But you might post maybe 2 paragraphs and say, if you want to read the rest of it, come to our website and subscribe. Next slide, please. Finding jobs and stories. A lot of people think, oh, LinkedIn's just for jobs. Yes, it's good for jobs. The search box is useful. The search box, often people don't know about search. So you can put anything into the search box and then it will bring you back those buttons down the bottom: people, jobs, companies, groups, courses, posts, schools, events, etc. You can filter for people. You can filter for jobs. You can filter for companies. So you want a job at a particular company. You can also then filter based on location. Now, you can also use LinkedIn to find interviewees, right? So let's say that I've heard of, I don't know, I feel like I'm with journalists, so I can just say what I would think, which is, train accident in Mexico City yesterday, right? So perhaps we know one person works at such and such a company. I can filter for people who work in Mexico City at the same company. I'm sorry, it's not a great example, but it's the one that just came to my mind because we're journalists and we deal in news. But I have actually done that to find people who are eyewitnesses to things, for example, to find people who know them. You can also use it to find, it's also a useful way of finding stories by filtering for topics that you're interested in. So a couple of people said mental health, you can filter for that. And there's also LinkedIn groups, a little bit like Facebook groups. And there's a link in the document that I've sent you. LinkedIn itself has a LinkedIn for Journalists group, which has 83,000 members and posts stuff about LinkedIn tools and facilities for journalists. Facebook also has one. And in fact, I've put a link in that to the document that we're sending you. Again, huge membership. They don't advertise it. It's a private group. You have to apply and you have to answer 3 mandatory questions to join that Facebook group. But that's where you find out about things like, oh, guys, we're about to change our algorithm. So lots of yummy stuff in the resources. Next slide, please. YouTube. Okay, I have blank. Oh, thank goodness, I blanked it out and the formatting has worked. Thank God. YouTube is the second biggest search engine after Google. It is often neglected or unused. You can add cover art, a link to your socials or website in the top banner. So you can see down, so the top one is just some random person, journalist. The bottom one is mine. And it took me about 5 hours to schmick up my YouTube channel. So if you land on my YouTube channel, even though I don't produce video very often, I have a featured video, which is what people get the first time they come. And then subsequent times they come, they can just see my videos. I've got some playlists. And you can see just underneath the hand on the right-hand side, holding that picture of lovely Fatima Guz from Tunisia, you can see my socials and my website are there. I saw recently someone had put their buy me a coffee. So Patreon and those sort of little, those kind of micropayment services are also available. Oh yeah, because YouTube is like it's the bin. It's where we drop video links, but that's also a platform, right? Okay, next slide, please. What to post? Videos you make could be video stories, audio stories with an image if you're doing podcasts. If you want, you can film tutorials and tips if you want to. Again, always, there's the what. I'm trying to cover very quickly some of the what. You in your own time have to ask why. Is there a value to me in doing this? So Lainey, you were mentioning doing videos, for example, right? So that you know the how, you know the what can I make? Then there's a question of, is there a value to me in doing this? Also videos with you in them. So I went and fished around and found all of the instances of talks that I'd given and I linked to them as a playlist and I made that one of my publicly available playlists. Took 10 minutes. If you can post transcripts of content, it helps drive search engine optimization and also links in posts. So often you'll see, and when you guys are interacting with your news outlets, you'll see that they're posting loads of videos and then the field below is crickets. And it's like, why isn't there a link to the story and, subscribe to our news service? At the very least, it costs nothing. So that's low effort, high return, but not posting anything. Whereas you see, people who do tutorials for a living, it's like all their affiliates and buy me a coffee and blah, blah, blah. So, just copying and learning a little bit. Next slide, please. Occasionally audit your online presence. Google yourself and see what comes up. Update or delete old profiles or accounts. I recently discovered an account, it's a profile of me that's at least 8 years old and catastrophically out of date. And the person who put it up doesn't work there anymore. And I'm going to dedicate half an hour to tracking someone down to say, could you please delete that? But it's a good exercise to do. Do it in Chrome and do it incognito. So it doesn't serve you up what you would normally see. There is a link in these slides, Google's outdated content tool. I've never used it, but I saw this link in another workshop and I was like, oh, that sounds really helpful. So I'm going to use it soon. And you can also set up a Google alert for your name. So if someone cites you online, you can set up a Google alert to be told about it. Purpose of auditing your online presence is to bring it up to date. You always just want to be your best shop front, right? So next slide, please. Creative tools. Yikes. Okay, looking at the clock. Content creation. Links to all of these are in the document that I'm sending you. So images, free ones on Unsplash, Pexels and Pixabay. Lily, you don't need to write any of this down. You'll get all of these in a PDF of the slides and a Word document. Just relax. Social and online content. Canva. I made all the artwork for my website in Canva, all of it. Pablo, similar. And then Adobe Spark is basically one of those scrolly story sites. So it'll scroll, you know, the sort of scrollies, right? So there'll be an image and then text and then a video and a bit more text and an image. And they're called long scrolls. It's great for long form storytelling. And Adobe Spark is a relatively cheap tool for making that. Website building services. I use Squarespace. I kind of like it. It only has 2 levels of navigation, which irritates me. But I taught myself to make it. So a couple of others, card.co. I like the look of it actually. WordPress, if you feel a bit comfortable with some coding, or you've got a bit of cash to hire someone. Sometimes that's a good loss, you know, it's a tax deduction, right? I outsource that problem to someone else so I don't have to learn how to solve it. And then about.me is like a visual calling card and cheap. And then journalism curation. There's 4 here that I like. Journo Portfolio, Authory is another one that launched a little while ago, and it's really aggressively marketing at journalists. So it might just be that they're good at marketing, right? It might not be as good as Journo Portfolio. So have a look and see what you like. Wakelet markets itself as the new Storify. So when Storify went out of business, Wakelet jumped into that space and said, hey, and they're quite good. And then clippings.me. So these are things that will just basically help you create content for social, and also if you've got a website to create content for it and build it. Next slide, please. I've gone slightly over. You took my 2 minutes, Paula. I know I'm over by 2 minutes. Darn it. Okay, website tips. Joke. We were just so keen to share so much with you guys. Personal domain names make you easy to find. Try and make them short and memorable, even if it's not your name. Try not to use dashes and dots. I've got an underscore in my Twitter handle, which I really should not have. Anyway, it's all right. It's not perfect. It's 80% perfect. If .com's not available, try .press or your country code. Quite a few people are using .co, you know, so thinking about that. And you can register a domain fairly cheaply. So, you know, Google Domains is one, GoDaddy is another one. I personally have a very random name, so I haven't bothered to buy my domain name. But, you know, advice is if you can buy something that represents your brand, buy it. Horror story though, and I do want to make time to tell this, even though it's going to take all of us over time. I didn't spend enough time thinking about my branding when I first launched as a consultant. As a result, I bought 3 domain names that I don't use. I spent probably 2 weeks of my life that I will never get back creating content for those websites. And I should have just sat back and thought, who am I and what's my brand? Right? So I've done it and I teach people not to do it. So actually the minute that we spent at the beginning of this, please don't buy my domain name, Lainey. I'll come after you. I saw that. So taking an hour to think about your brand is a really good exercise. Human-centered design, again, great saying. It's easier to use an eraser than it is to use a wrecking ball, right? Don't go so far down the design of something before asking yourself why you are building it and who for, right? You can always rub it out. Once you've built it, you have to knock it down and it gets expensive. Next slide, please. Oh, thank God, we're at the end. I was like, how many more slides did I make? Jeez, and there's 15 comments. Please stop sharing. I'm going back. Okay, let me see. Oh, thanks for your patience, you guys. That was awesome. I want to say I have open DMs on Twitter. So if you want to ask me direct questions about anything that came out of today, please feel free. And I do want to be really available to you guys to help, you know. I'm really keen to receive your questions. If you want me to give you some feedback on a site or anything ever, really, not joking, really happy to do it.